All right, I got the broadcaster started here. We will see how the feeds go this week. I am in the process of looking over here to see if things are going live on the computer side of things. Yes, we have liftoff. We have success this week. That is awesome. Last week, if you tried to tune in, we had some technical difficulties. The streaming didn't make it out to YouTube. And we got to some places, not all places, but hey, we are live. I'm seeing it on my screen over here. That's a good thing. Firstly, I just want to thank all of you for tuning in. I also want to thank Botech for teaming up with me to do this series. This series is called Hunting Strategies, and the purpose of it is to help everyone and myself get ready for hunting season right around the corner. I'm sure everyone's starting to feel the adrenaline. Everyone's checking their trail cameras, getting excited, seeing some of those nice bucks. I know this week I checked the camera and had a couple nice bucks showing up that weren't there before. And if I remember, I will talk a little bit about that in a little while. But I just want to, get into tonight. So if you caught last week's episode, what I did is I started off with a little archery tip, and then I talked about wind direction and thermals. And so this week I wanted to put in another archery tip to get it started because, hey, we should be out there shooting. If we're not, we need to start shooting to get ready for hunting season because, archery, a lot of it is, there's a lot of muscle memory involved, and the more you practice, the more in tune your body stays and the more you stay on top of how you're shooting. So last week I talked about just spending the week looking at your draw length, making sure that your draw length is where it really should be. I encourage you to have, I call it 3 touch points for your anchoring. I have my hand right in here. I have a kisser button right in the corner of my mouth and the string on the tip of my nose. Those are my 3 touch points. For this week, I was thinking, what do I really want to talk about as an archery tip for you to focus on this week? And I realized, as I was thinking about this, there is a key topic that I actually didn't cover in my book, my archery book. I go through a lot of technical details in archery form and everything in my book, Sin and the Spirituality of Archery. And at the end, of course, I throw in a little spiritual throw twist in there. And to make sure it wasn't a surprise for people, I kind of made that the title of the book. But really, a lot of this is to help people in their archery. But one of the things I didn't cover is torque. And so I want to talk about that now. And I'm going to have to write a couple more chapters or sections in the book and put out a second edition here to make sure that's, just looking over here. It looks like there's a bunch of people chiming in. Oh, and that reminds me. In a little while, I want to get to questions and question and answer session. I am a one-man show. I don't have a camera crew. As I said last week, I have a camera arm. So if I need to move the camera, it's me. And it's me kind of managing the computer here. So if you have a question, please pop over to my YouTube channel if you're not there, because this feed is going all over the place. It's going to Botech sites, it's going to Diamond sites, Excalibur, and I can't manage all those. Like I said, I'm a one-man show. So if you have a burning question, please pop over to my Sean's Outdoor Adventures YouTube channel and put it in the feed when I get to that point where I'm ready to ask for questions because I'm just going to be looking for them there primarily. And in the future, as I get more accustomed to this whole thing, maybe I'll try to branch out and cover a couple sites or whatever. So here we are. I want to talk a little bit about torque, and here's the main thing I want to cover with torque and what is happening when we torque the bow. So when you place your hand on the bow, you're gripping it like this. One thing I try to do is imagine that the center point of my grip, where my hand is coming in contact with the bow, is putting straightforward pressure against the bow in the middle of the handle. So let me just draw an exaggerated example. Let's say I grip the bow here, but all of my kind of pressures from this side, I can kind of be pushing the bow at full draw. Or if I have my hand overly turned this way, I could be actually pushing the bow at full draw. What I would like you to do this week, when you're at the target, the practice range, arrow nocked, pointed at the target, don't go grab your bow right now and pull it back without an arrow on there. You never want to do that. You don't want to risk blowing up your limbs. But when you're at full draw, do this with your hand and watch what the sight does. And do it even in small increments, and you're going to see how dramatic you can actually be changing your aiming if you're altering your grip even a little bit. And so a lot of people, they go out and they shoot and they're hitting great today, and then they go out tomorrow and they shoot and they're like 3, 4, 5 inches to the left or 5 inches to the right or whatever the case is. And a lot of that can be due to torquing your grip. You could have been gripping like this today and you weren't thinking about it the next time you go out, so you're kind of like that. Did you see my sight move? Boom! That is going to cause a huge difference in where your arrow is going to hit down the range, especially the farther out you're shooting. So this week, archery tip this week is be aware of torque and get out there, get familiar with what this does. And as you see this happening, you know, when you're playing around and intentionally doing that, try to solidify your grip so that the pressure from your palm is in the center of the grip so that the bow isn't being pushed one way or the other. So that's my tip this week for the archery. And hey, I am very excited. I didn't want to announce any of this last week because this past weekend we did the scouting trip for the Map Reading Challenge. And this is a very exciting thing if you've been following my channel. Over the years, I kind of evolved into these challenge hunts where I was challenging myself. I would look at topo maps and aerial photos and drive like 5 hours away from my house and scout a spot for like 3 hours and drive all the way back. And then I would go back in hunting season to see if I could score on a deer. And this I originally called it the 4-hour challenge because I wanted to drive at least 4 hours away. But it evolved over time and it became this challenge hunt where it doesn't matter how far you are from where you live, but you're challenging yourself to be able to look at a topo map and an aerial photo and pick an excellent hunting spot without even going there. And then you go there one time and take a look at that. Was I right? Is the deer sign here? And can I go back in hunting season and score on a deer here? And it continued to evolve. I started to take applications from my viewers, and now I take out groups of hunters, people who have applied on these challenge hunts. Well, this year it's blowing up, and I just want to quickly tell you about it before I get into the main topic tonight, which is deer calling. And I get so many questions on that's why I wanted to cover it tonight. But I am going to call on my camera hand and shift over here to my board for a second. I kind of mapped this out a little bit today. So the exciting thing for this year is it grew into this challenge hunt, which is going beyond just challenge yourself to get a high score. Like I created a scoring system so that when you go out on a hunt, if you're successful, boom, you get a score for that. And you want to try to push yourself to do even better next time. So now I have 4 teams, 3 people on each team from all over the country. And they're going to win prizes, and so are the viewers. So check this out. I want to go over this, and then I want to talk about deer calling. So each hunter is going to go out and try to score on a deer. Like I said, we read the topo maps, we read the aerial photos. This past 2 weekends, I took one group out 2 weekends ago, another group out this past weekend. We filmed it. I'm going to be airing those episodes probably next month. And anyway, when somebody harvests a deer, they get a score for that. So out of all 12 hunters that I have, the one that with the ultimate highest score from the hunt is going to win some stuff here. They're going to win a Ripcord Ace arrow rest. They're going to win a hunting backpack from the Allen Company. And I actually have a few other things in the works, so they might be getting more prizes than just what I talk about tonight. I'm just waiting to hear back from a couple companies. The team of 3 people with the highest score is going to win this list of stuff from the Allen Company, such as broadheads, broadhead case, string wax, knot glue, bow sling, stuff like that. Now here's where things get real big and real interesting, and this is where the viewers, you, are involved. The hunters are also going to get a score from their hunt, but other things added in. So they're each going to get a video of their scouting trip and their hunting trip. So each video, whatever the total number of views, is going to be added to their hunting score. And I'm going to put a 0 on the end of the hunting score. So if the hunting score was 150 points, we'll make it 1,500. If it was 300 points, we'll make it 3,000. That's really going to boost things. So, and then the views on their videos is going to be added to that. Now here's where Bowtech comes into play. We're going to set up stuff on the Bowtech and my website where you can vote for who you want to win. those votes are going to be added in the total score. And when you vote for your favorite hunter, your name goes into the lottery and someone's going to win a brand new Bowtech Rain 6. You pick the camo color, whatever. So you have a chance to win just by voting for your favorite hunter. So I know all the guys on the show are going to be having their spouses and friends say, hey, will you vote for me and will you give me the bow if you win? Okay, so the individual who has the highest score after all this voting takes place is going to get a Bowtech Rain 6. They're also going to get a bow case from the Allen Company. They're also going to get a set of XOP portable climbing sticks. Now the team with the highest score, when all this stuff's added up, they're going to get an XOP Air Raid tree stand. Each person on that team. Now you, the viewer, as I said, you're going to win, there's someone going to be drawn, they're going to win a Bowtech Rain 6. They're also going to get a bow case for that bow from the Allen Company. Also, I'm going to do a lottery with the people who are on my newsletter. So if you want to get on that, you know, it's on my website. You'll have plenty of time to get in that. You're going to get an XOP Air Raid tree stand from me. And we're going to do an award ceremony. I'm going to just give you, that's the basic layout of it. But I was excited to tell you, so hopefully you didn't mind I threw that in there. But hey, it gives you a chance to win a Bowtech Rain 6, so it's worth checking out that information. Now, let us transition into deer calling, finally. One of the things I really wanted to focus on tonight is what I'm going to call best practices. When I originally set up this live stream, I was going to call it do's and don'ts of deer calling. And that idea is going to be put in there. Like there's some recommendations that I don't recommend that you do this. And there's things I recommend you do this. But really what it comes down to, this is what I would suggest as best practices. And I've called in a lot of deer. Most of my hunting's on public land. I've got a lot of deer, a lot of bucks. So, I mean, a lot of what I'm going to talk about has a pretty much proven track record across the board. And what I first want to say, and I often say this, and I'm just going to keep track of my time here, is that deer can always surprise you. Let me say that again. Deer can always surprise you. And what I hear a lot of people do is they put deer in a box. Like, if you do this, this will happen. If you do that, that will happen. And that's not always the case with deer. Like, I'm not going to stand here and say, if you do this exact call at this exact time, you will get a big buck. That's not the case, because deer, in a sense, have their own personality, each deer, just like we do. And, you know, you watching, you and I are probably a little bit different aspects of our personality. And there are behaviors of deer that can vary from one deer to another. I've got a buddy who, you know, rattled one year, and this buck came charging in and was really angry, and my buddy shot him, and the deer had broken off tines. And that deer was very responsive to aggressive calling, which is obvious by the broken tines. You may have a very different reaction from a deer. You could rattle, and that deer gets cautious. And it's like, well, you know what? I'm going to circle downwind, and that deer could circle downwind, and you don't get the shot. So, as you can see in that little example, the same thing was done, which was rattling. Let's even say aggressively, but the deer did something very different. So, always be ready for deer to surprise you or not do what you want them or expect them to do. So with that said, what I want to talk about is what I perceive to be best practices within that kind of mindset. And I want to start off with, let's say, grunting. And grunting is, you know, it's one of the most standard calls, and it's one of the most effective universal calls. I mean, I have, you know, antlers on the wall here, but I have called in so many doe, like I don't even think I could count them. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the grunting aspect and times of years that I would say grunting is one of those things that deer do all year long. So this is a call that can literally work all throughout the hunting season. And, you know, a lot of new people say, how often should I call? How many times should I call? You know, how long should I wait between call series? And what that tells me is they already are making a mistake. And the mistake is, I encourage you, don't rely on deer calling for you to be successful. Instead, rely on your scouting skills. And in a lot of situations, calling is an act of desperation. It's like, I didn't do a good enough job scouting. I'm not right where the deer are, so I need to try to get some extra help to bring them in close. And that's really what's happening in a lot of situations. And what can happen is people can easily overcall, like call too much. When you're sitting in the woods, how often do you hear deer grunting? Especially when you see them. You're going to hear it, but it's not a lot. And so what I try to do when I am in the woods is mimic what is naturally happening. So in the early season, you're going to hear some grunting, and a lot of times, especially like that first week of hunting season, it's going to be doe, and they communicate a lot with the fawns. And so you'll also hear fawns bleating at that time. You're looking for their mother. There has been so many times in the morning that I have grunted and called doe right to me. And it's because the doe, especially that time of year, they're social, they're meeting up with other does and their fawns, and then they go bed down for the day. So let's say you just want to get a deer. A grunting in the morning especially is a good way to do that, especially if you're just looking for a doe. Now when it comes to how often and how much, I try to do it very sparingly. So if I'm seeing deer and they're just not coming my way, I'll start off with 1 or 2 soft grunts. Let me just give you an example. And I like to play with my grunt call to alter the, like you can go, you know, like that. But I like to really try to add authenticity. So I bend the tube a little bit, and I do this with my hand. So my hand just muffled it. Let me try that again. So I do things like that. And if you're an animal over there and I'm doing this with the sound and then I'm cupping it off, the sound is kind of being thrown over that way. So it's going to alter the way it sounds to you. So it just kind of makes it a little more diverse than a straight like that. Although deer will respond to this just as they will like that. And it's because it sounds close enough to what a deer is actually going to do, but I just like to get into it a little bit. So in the mornings, if it's early season, I like to just do a couple soft grunts. If you see a deer, and this is a good thing to think about. There's blind calling, and then you're calling to a deer you see. So if you see a deer moving down through the woods, and I've had this happen many times, sometimes I've just seen the legs of the deer through the thick stuff. And I'll just let out a couple grunts, 2 or 3, like something like that. Maybe not even that drawn out, shorter, like that. And I'll just stop, and they'll turn and look, or they'll turn and come right in. One thing you have to realize is when a deer hears a grunt, it pretty much has you pinpointed, and you kind of want to stop. Especially, I mean, if a deer comes your direction, put the call away. Get it out of your hand. Don't touch it again. It knows basically where you're at, if not exactly where you're at. And I've had deer 80 yards away that I see walking through the woods and I grunt. They come straight to the base of the tree because in that moment they were able to pinpoint the sound of the grunt. With that said, now's where the wind direction comes into play. So if they're moving and they hear that grunt and it seems like they move off, well, you take note which way is the wind blowing. And the way that they kind of left is that downwind, because there's a chance they're circling downwind. And the wind is crucial, especially for you new hunters who want to get out there, you want to get a deer, you want to be successful, you want to call deer, you want to have them come right in, stuff like that. You need to be patient. I would say there's so many times in the stand, I'll be in the stand, let me just put this around my neck for a second. I'll have this around my neck underneath my camo jacket in the stand, and then I just reach in and pull it out when I want to use it. There's so many times where you're excited, you want, especially in the beginning of the season, you just want that action and nothing's happening. You're tempted to reach in there and pull it out and try to make something happen. Very often, I just say to myself, just be patient, because you could be ruining your hunting spot, especially your favorite hunting spot, by doing that. There could be deer in the area, you just don't see them, and if you start grunting and you never see the deer, they could work their way around downwind. They could, you're sitting there like, man, nothing's happening. A little bit of movement. That deer could be watching you. And there's some deer that will be nice enough to let you know you've been had by snorting at you. But there's a lot of deer, especially your smart buck, they're just going to turn, keep their tail down, and walk quickly away. They're not going to run. They're just going to walk away. They know better. So when it comes to that early, especially when you get in the stand beginning of the season and you're full of excitement, try to lay off the grunt call as much as you can. You could overblow your grunt call and blow up your spot. So now let me give you this example. One time it was actually a late season hunt, very end of the season, and I was running out of time. I still had a buck tag. The season in Pennsylvania ended, but they have special regulation areas that now stay open, and you can get a buck in those. I think that's what the situation was. It was a late season hunt where I could still get a buck, however it worked out. I was down in a special regulation area. I went to a place I hadn't been to since I was a teenager. So we're talking almost half my lifetime, or more than half my lifetime ago. It's been a long time. I'm in my mid-40s just about. So I hadn't been there 15, 20 years, but I remembered the lay of the land, and it was public land. And I remembered what the deer did when I was young, and I analyzed it with all my knowledge now, and I'm like, okay, if I go here, I think I got a good shot at something. And I went to that spot, and there was a slight gradual uphill up to where the deer bedded from where I was positioned, because the public land ended about 70 yards from where I was in a tree stand, and then it was still public land, but they called it a safety zone. It was like within 150 yards of houses, so they don't let you hunt there. And so I was back off of that, and I know the deer bedded up in a thicket up the hill. The whole entire hunt, the wind was blowing straight up the hill, and I knew this is my only shot, is to not blow the grunt call. And I sat there for a good 3 or 4 hours because late season, I just wanted to give it my all. I wanted to be out in this woods as long as I could, just in case something came by. And this is what happens, guys and girls. If you're hunting and you're not paying attention to the wind and the wind's blowing the wrong way, let's say you're going to be in the stand for 4 hours or 3 hours, and you blow the grunt call right now, like 3 hours before they get up from their beds. They've already pinpointed where you are. And if the wind's blowing their direction, let's say they're not perfectly downwind of you right now, they're going to get up when they do and walk to downwind of you and scent check what was that. And you've already ruined your hunt, so you've just sat out there all that time for nothing. So I did zero calling, and I just stuck it out. And at the very end of the hunt, there was about 20 minutes left of shooting light. I looked up the hill straight downwind of me, and I was very careful to eliminate everything. There were 2 bucks, and they were coming straight down the hill toward me. And I was like, wow, I can't believe it. It's working. And the deer came down, and in this situation, I made a decision to not call, because again, they're still downwind of me. I don't want to alert them to where I'm at. So they came down right to the edge of the safety zone, and they started milling around, and then the one buck mingled down into a little bit of a valley right here below me, and it kind of hung out there, and it also hung up. But I wasn't high enough in the tree to feel confident enough to start grunting. So it's like, in that situation, I just said, I don't think it's going to work out. I chose to not grunt anyway because deer could come from another angle. And in fact, with about 5 minutes of shooting light, a doe came just right past him and literally walked right past me, maybe 5 yards from the base of the tree. And I didn't shoot her. I don't even remember if I had a doe tag or not. But the point is, if that had been a buck, I would have ruined my chance at that deer if I was like, well, you know what, there's only like 5 or 10 minutes left. I'm just going to try grunting anyway. So the thought of patience and just seeing how it plays out, you don't need to get a deer every time you go out. And if I was going to go back and hunt that spot, I didn't ruin it. And, you know, that's a thing to keep in mind. Especially, like, how many hunting spots do you have right now? And do you want to keep them good, or do you want to, like, let the deer know you're there and ruin them? And so how you call is going to be significant in that. I'm going to say, if you have a question, post it right now, and I'm going to start talking a little bit about 1 or 2 other things, and then I'm going to look over here. It looks like there's a lot of people who have been just commenting. saying all kinds of stuff. But if you have questions, put them up right now. They're going to be the most recent ones that come up. I will be able to see them. And I want to talk about bleeding, and I also want to talk about rattling and that stuff too. I want to incorporate that here. A lot of people have seen these bleat cans. This is a Primus one. These things can work really well. I've shot deer bleating like that. And I prefer to bleat with my voice, and I talk about this in some of my calling videos. I think you can, manipulate your throat and your mouth to make it sound even more authentic than this. I mean, and this, that's what you get every time. And then if you're, a little bit shaky, you could be doing that, and I've done that. You see that deer and your hand just starts shaking, and you try to, oh, look at that buck. And so it's not as smooth, and so you have to really work hard to turn it over just right. So you have that, but if you learn how to bleat with your voice, you can really modify it. I just constrict the back of my throat. I kind of almost pull those muscles in, and I go, and you can use your lips to add authenticity. I've had fawns come running by me, and they don't just do a straight bleat. It's almost like they're let's say they're saying help. There's a transition to the pitch or the tone or whatever. I'm not a singer, so I don't know all that terminology. But if you learn how to do that with your throat, that's one less thing you have to be playing with your hands, less motion. You can be sitting there and you can bleat like that. And I remember the very first time I ever tried doing that. The first time in the woods. Boring hunt. I mean, I was sitting there and I'm not seeing anything at all, and I was just like, I am bored out of my mind. In fact, this hunt, I talked about it in my first hunting book, and I am working on a sequel to this right now, so those of you who read it, stay tuned because the sequel's coming eventually here. But I talked about this hunt in there, and if you ever want to get those, go to my website, Sean'sOutdoorAdventures.com. Anyway, I was talking about it in there, sitting there, boring hunt, and I just sitting in my tree stand, and I'm I'm just doing that. I did it about 5 or 6 times, literally. I was just bored. I didn't think anything was going to happen. I just did it in every direction, and then I sat there. 2 minutes later, a doe walked right to me, and I ended up getting a shot at her. So that can be very effective. Let me just talk about combination calling too, and I'm going to do 2 things here. I'm going to talk about combination calling, and I'm going to talk about starting off slow. There's a lot of guys, especially in the rut, they get that rattle bag or the rattle antlers, and they just want to go for it. They're like, yeah. And last year in Iowa, I went blind map reading challenge in Iowa. I'd never been there before. I just drove out, got a tag, finally pulled a tag for Iowa. Got up, hiked into the public land, got up in a tree in the area where I picked on a map, and I'm sitting there, maybe a half hour, and I hear a guy on the next little ridge over, just every 5 minutes at the most, he's rattling aggressively. And I'm thinking, man, give it a break, dude. You're just killing the area. And eventually, I had between rattle sequences over there, I had a buck come off this ridge over here, down into the little valley here, come right up behind me, and he was standing here about 15 yards to my left, and that guy was rattling again, so the buck actually stepped up and was looking over there and was, listening to this guy go crazy, and then the buck turned around and walked away. I guess the buck knew, this, I'm not having this, or whatever. And the guy ended up, I guess, leaving, because after about an hour or 2 of this, he left. And that's one thing. Especially in the rut, you got to get it right. I mean, the deer aren't always going to respond, and if you're just rattling constantly, you could be ruining your spot. So I always like to start off soft and slow. There was a morning I was hunting public land in New York, this buck right here, and I added some cards. If you're watching the stream on my YouTube channel, I added some cards. The How to Hunt Whitetail Deer is one of them, and shooting this deer is in that series there. So anyway, what I did is I really felt like this is the perfect situation to do a little rattling. It was the last day or two of October, and the deer were starting to get fired up a little bit. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to start off soft. So I bleated one time. That was it. And I immediately heard 2 grunts in response, and I heard a deer trotting toward me, and it was this buck right here. And he eventually, and I didn't call again. That was it. He stopped and hung up about 50 yards out because he was looking for the deer. He eventually turned and kept looking for the deer and offered me a broadside shot at 25 yards. So when you're in the woods this year, especially when you're getting in the rut and you want to start banging and clanging, I encourage you, and this is my best practices advice, start off soft and see what happens. That way you're not just totally blowing up your area and scaring all the deer off like that guy was in Iowa last year. Now I want to talk about combination calling. This deer right here, I shot that in Illinois. That's also in the How to Hunt Whitetail Deer series. I heard a buck making a rub or a scrape about 100 some yards away from me as it was getting light. So I'm like, okay, something's going on there. So I grunted. I did like 2 grunt. No, I started with a bleat. Let's just use the can for this situation. I went, waited a second. Now imagine that's a doe looking for a buck. Put that down. And then I gave it like a couple grunts. So now I might have given the impression there could be a buck and a doe over here. And immediately this buck turned and came right to me. It walked up onto the little ridge I was on, and it walked probably 120, 130 yards straight to my tree and looked right up at me. Again, I hadn't, the deer was far, 150 yards. I bleated like once or twice and then grunted, and that was it. I put the calls away. He came up and walked right to me. And that's just an example of how easily they can pinpoint your location. And I do remember I was going to ask for questions a minute ago. Okay, someone asked me, can I cover rabbit hunting? Definitely, that's something not fitting into tonight's episode, but I can look at maybe talking about it in the future and maybe even getting someone else to join me. I know a guy who's like super big into it, but I will try to look into that. But for tonight, I'm kind of focusing on deer calling. Okay, John Klopp is saying, what would be the best overall call to use? Grunt tube, bleat, rattle horns. I would say the best universal call is going to be your grunt or your bleat. It's non-aggressive. Well, depending on how you do it, it's generally non-aggressive. It's a social call, and it would be like, let me put it to you this way. It's the difference of saying, hey, how you doing? You know, which you could get out of the grunt or the bleat. And with rattling, it's like, hey, what are you doing here? You know, or, you know, it's, well, in a lot of situations, I should say, when you're still in the early archery season, if you're just soft tickling the rattle antlers or the rattle bag, like, you know, that could work in the evening time especially, but still I think the grunt will be better. And let me just throw this in so I clarify, especially if you're kind of new to all this. In the early season, like late September, early October, in most of your north and central regions, I haven't hunted a lot in the south, so their timing could be a little bit different. But going into the hunting season, in the early season, what bucks do is they meet up, especially in open areas. So like, I'm going to talk about this in next week's episode as far as how to strategize for setting up in the early season. But they meet up in these open areas and they just put their antlers together and they start pushing. And when they do that, you get these clicks and clacks. It's not aggressive. It's like I just did with the rattle bag, like, you know, like that. And so they're just kind of doing these pushing. And if you are pushing somebody, you can feel how strong you are in relation to them. And if they push you back, they can feel how strong they are in relation to you. And that's kind of what the deer are doing. They can tell who is stronger, and so they're establishing a pecking order, like who's the strongest, who is in charge when the rut comes in. So like now, if you have a 4-year-old, real big, strong buck, just pushing a 2-year-old around, well, come the rut, that 2-year-old's going to be like, I know this dude is way stronger than me, so I'm just going to stay out of his way. And what that does is that naturally prevents a lot of aggressive fighting. I mean, you still have plenty of it, especially when you have a lot of deer of the same age class. But it also avoids a lot of injuries because the deer already know who's stronger. And so in early season, it's not so much a, hey, get it, what are you doing here kind of a thing. It's more like, let's see who's stronger. It can work, but getting back full circle to the question, if I had to pick one call, I'd probably use the grunt call the most. I just feel like it seems to be like a good universal call. If I blow in the grunt call anytime throughout the season, I can really attract any deer of any age. You know, there are different types of grunting, and I'm talking about a standard, like that type of a grunt. If you do a long, drawn out, and deeper grunt, that is actually what's called a tending grunt, and you'll hear that in the rut. It typically won't come out before the rut, and that is a buck that's getting ready to breed a doe, essentially. And it can be very effective on making other bucks mad because they want to be the one breeding the doe, and so they'll come running in. I've actually had scenarios where I've seen buck. I'm thinking of one when I was in Illinois one year. I saw a real nice heavy 8-point, and he was probably about 75 yards away. So I bleated at him first with the bleat. I actually was using this exact bleat cam probably. I've had this for a super duper long time since they first came out. So this is going back many years. So I bleated, you know, thinking, oh, it's the rut. He's going to hear that and come right in. I just watched him make a scrape. I bleated like a couple times. He just kept walking off. So then I tried grunting at him. Nothing. I tried snort wheezing at him. And a lot of times the snort wheeze, that can get him angry and want to come in and say, hey, I'm in charge here, you know. It didn't work. I switched to the tending grunt, that long drawn out grunt, and boom, that's what got him. And he came right in past a tree. I got a shot and I flubbed it. I nipped the bottom of it and didn't find a deer. Boy, was that upsetting. But the point is, you know, I think just the standard grunt, I often will do a 3-grunt series like that, and I like to accentuate the middle one a little bit because I've heard doe do that a lot in the wild. And a lot of times when a dominant doe does that, it says to the other deer, come here, like the younger doe. I've watched, you know, I was in New York, actually not far from where I shot this deer when I first started hunting up in New York, and I live in Pennsylvania. But I was up there on public land, and I had a group of 5 doe, you know, 1.5-year-olds. By the way, 1.5-year-old deer are yearlings, and 6-month-old deer are still fawns, considered fawns. So a lot of people call fawns yearlings, but just for technical terminology, yearlings are 1.5-year-old doe. So I had a group of yearlings and fawns underneath me, and then a dominant doe came down the edge of a field. It was actually a brush field. And I'd say it was about 130 yards from my tree stand. She walked down the edge, did that grunt, like that, and they all turned and trotted to her. It was really cool to see. And so I use that grunt call a lot when I'm, you know, in the early season, especially when I do throw out a grunt call, and I'll do that like 1 or 2 times, and that's it. I'll put the call away. If a deer hears it and it's in the mood to respond, it's going to come. So let me see if I got any other questions here. Phases of the moon affect the rut. Some say it's a myth. Others say it's been proven. What are your thoughts on this, Sean? Actually, I have devoted I was going to devote a whole you know, evening to that in this series, and I will say I have done a lot of observation on that, and I'm going to weigh in a little heavier in that episode. But I'd say it doesn't have the impact that a lot of people are saying, and I want to give more detail on that, but I don't want to do that now because that's a whole nother talk in the series. So I've got a couple more coming up. I've got next week is early season strategy. So your strategy in the early season, for me, is a lot different, or quite different, than it is coming into the rut. So I want to talk about those early season strategies next week. The week after that, a lot of times we hit a mid-season lull. You know, the deer just don't seem to move, and I want to talk about some strategies for that. Talk about strategies going into the rut and in the rut. you should have, in my opinion, different strategies in each of those phases of the season, because the deer are doing different things, they're responding to different things, and they're acting different ways. And so I want to get into that. What arrows do I shoot? Well, this year I'll be shooting some arrows that were given to me by Jewelry Outdoors. If you don't know this, I was picked by Jewelry Outdoors to be on a new production that they're doing. So they have given me some arrows from them, and they are, I forget, well, it just says Jewelry Outdoors on them, and they're manufactured by, it says PSE Jewelry Outdoors. So I'm not positive who the actual manufacturers, but it's got their names on it. It's the Bow Madness series, and they're 300s. Last year I shot the Easton Flatlines, and I shot those the last couple years. I have a very long draw length, so I can kind of get away with a little bit more than some people. With the long draw length, I was shooting a pretty light arrow and still getting great penetration. If you have a shorter draw length, you might want to go with something a little bit higher grains per pound. And again, when you get into it, when you're talking about hunting, it's different than target archery. Target archery, especially if you're shooting, like, let's say 3D shoots, and if they're not predicted distances, so that you're not sure, you know, obviously you want to try to get your pins as close together as possible because you're guessing the yardage, and if they're closer together and you guess wrong, you'll still be close. But when you get into hunting, you want a heavier arrow because it provides more of a punching force when it hits the deer and drives the arrow through. I think of it like this. Imagine if I had a wiffle ball, a little plastic ball, and I threw it against that wall behind the camera, it's going to bounce off of that wall. But if I took an actual baseball, it's harder, it's heavier, and I threw it at that wall, boom, it's going to put a hole in that wall. And that's the kind of concept. You don't want to go too light because you're not going to get the penetration you need. And there's a lot of guys, in fact, one of the guys on the map reading challenge this year, Aaron Jones, we were talking about that on the scout trip. When he first started off, he had too light of an arrow, he hit a deer, and he just didn't get the penetration he needed. And that can happen. So when you're picking your arrow, I want my total arrow to weigh in the 400s usually. And, you know, like, I was shooting a little bit lighter the last couple of years to try it out. It wasn't a problem. But really, I think my ideal weight for me is right around 415 grains. And I hunt mainly whitetail deer. You could talk to people who hunt out in the Midwest for bigger animals like elk, and they want a heavier arrow. I haven't personally hunted elk, but I do feel that, you know, I think I would be all right with, you know, 425 grain, but I would do a little more research if I was going to do an elk hunt. And I do prefer, and some states require, a fixed blade broadhead in those scenarios with a razor blade all the way to the tip. You get good penetration with that. So I have time for maybe one more question, and I'm going to wrap things up, I think. Okay, recommended bows for new hunters. Thanks and great videos. That is from Karen. Okay, I mean, honestly, I'm doing this series in conjunction with Bowtech, and they also make the Diamond line. And I'm not actually about saying what I'm about to say because of that. If you go back and watch my videos, and like I have how to, you know, archery for beginners that I put up years and years ago, all the comments I've made over the years is I really like the Diamond Infinite Edge and now the Diamond Edge SB1. I just think they're great bows because they're so versatile. You can go from a really short draw length to a long draw length out to like 30. You can lower the poundage way down so you can fit it to a young person, and that person can grow with the bow and just increase the weight. And in fact, I just set my dad up. I had a Diamond Edge SB1, and I just set my dad up with it because my dad, he doesn't shoot a lot. He's not an all year round shooter who's shooting 4 or 5 days a week. And so, you know, I had the bow and I knew I could get it perfect for his draw length. It was a great fit. So we got him outfitted with that. And my dad's been hunting for a long time. He's been shooting for a long time. And it's a good bow for him. But it's also a good bow if you're a young person and you're growing. So, and if he ever decides, you know what, I don't want to shoot anymore, well, when my son gets older, my son could try the bow. We could just switch the draw length and the draw weight. And a bow like that, it's just real versatile. A lot of bows, getting aside from that for a minute, they're in 10-pound increments, you know, so if it's a 60-pound limb, you can only go from 50 pounds to 60 pounds. And so you're a little bit limited on who can shoot that bow. A young person maybe just can't shoot that bow, whereas something like the Diamond Edge SB1, you can crank it way down. And so that is my recommendation personally, and I've always kind of really liked those bows for their versatility. That's my suggestion. So I know there's another, at least usually there's another show coming up, and so they like me to wrap up to give them time to get ready for that. So I'm going to wrap up this show here. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm sorry that I'm sure there's a lot of comments over there that or questions, and what I'll do is I'll try to take a look at some of those. I will be posting this video. I'll see how the video quality is from the live stream, and if I'm not happy with it, I'll repost it if I can or whatever. Or actually, you know what? I didn't even hit record tonight. I did last week. So hopefully the live version is going to be good. And if I missed a question, just ask it underneath of that video when this posts, and I will get back to you. I really try to get back to everybody. So, hey, stay tuned for next week. We're going to talk about early season strategies. What I think you should be doing for that first week of the season, like what strategy would work best, and that's what I want to get into. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Bowtech, and I'll look forward to all of you coming in next week. God bless you. Hey, I gotta turn this off. I don't have a crew here. There's nobody else but me. Let's see here. Bye-bye, everybody.